Sarah Martinez stepped onto the shooting range with her heart pounding against her ribs. The smell of gunpowder and the sharp crack of rifles filled the air around her. She had been looking forward to this day for months, ever since she signed up for the advanced marksmanship course at the local gun club. What she didn't expect was the wall of skeptical stares that greeted her as she walked past the other participants. The shooting range was dominated by men who looked like they had been handling firearms since they could walk. Their weathered hands and confident stances told stories of years spent perfecting their craft. Sarah, on the other hand, was a 28-year-old graphic designer from downtown who had only recently discovered her passion for shooting sports. Her small frame and soft-spoken demeanor made her stand out like a flower in a field of thorns. Well, what do we have here?" called out Rick, a burly man with arms covered in military tattoos. He was the unofficial leader of the group, the kind of person who commanded attention just by existing. "Looks like someone took a wrong turn from the yoga studio." The other men chuckled, their laughter echoing across the concrete walls of the indoor range. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she kept her head high. She had faced this kind of treatment before. In a world where shooting sports were still heavily male-dominated, she had learned to let her actions speak louder than words. "Maybe she's here to take pictures of us real shooters," another voice piped up from the group. This came from Tony, a man in his 50s who wore his veteran status like a badge of honor. His comments sparked another round of laughter. Sarah quietly set up her gear at the assigned station. She had saved for months to buy her custom rifle, a precision instrument that she had spent countless hours learning to use. Every weekend for the past year, she had driven to smaller ranges outside the city, practicing until her shoulder ached and her fingers were numb from the cold. She knew she was good, but she also knew that proving it would be the only way to earn any respect here. The range instructor, a gruff man named Dale, called for attention. He explained the day's exercise, a series of increasingly difficult targets at various distances. The course was designed to test not just accuracy, but also adaptability and mental focus under pressure. Each participant would be scored on their performance, with the top 3 receiving recognition and a chance to compete in regional championships. As Dale explained the rules, Sarah noticed the way the other participants kept glancing at her. Their expressions ranged from amused to annoyed, as if her presence somehow diminished the seriousness of their sport. She had encountered this attitude before, but it never got easier to handle. "Ladies first," Rick announced with exaggerated chivalry when it came time to begin. "Let's see what our little artist can do." Sarah stepped up to the firing line, her rifle feeling familiar and comfortable in her hands. She had learned to block out distractions, to find that quiet space in her mind where only she and the target existed. As she settled into her shooting position, the snickers and whispered comments from behind her faded into background noise. The first target was set at 100 yards, a standard bullseye that most experienced shooters could hit consistently. Sarah controlled her breathing, aligned her sights, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, steady pressure she had practiced thousands of times. The bullet struck dead center. "Lucky shot," someone muttered behind her. The second target appeared at 200 yards, smaller and more challenging. Sarah adjusted her scope, calculated for wind drift, and fired again. Another perfect hit. The murmuring behind her grew quieter. As the targets became more difficult and the distances increased, Sarah's performance remained consistent. Each shot found its mark with mechanical precision. What had started as amused observation from the other participants gradually shifted to grudging attention. By the time she reached the 500-yard targets, the range had fallen almost completely silent except for the sound of her rifle and the ping of bullets hitting steel. Rick's confident smirk had disappeared entirely. Tony had stopped making jokes and was now watching intently through binoculars. The other participants formed a loose semicircle behind the firing line, their earlier dismissiveness replaced by something approaching respect. Sarah completed her round with a score that was not just good, but exceptional. As she set down her rifle and stepped back from the line, she could feel the shift in the room's energy. The same men who had been making jokes about yoga studios and art classes were now studying her with the kind of attention usually reserved for fellow competitors. "Not bad for a beginner," Rick said, though his tone lacked its earlier mockery. He was clearly struggling to reconcile his preconceptions with what he had just witnessed. Sarah simply nodded and began cleaning her rifle. She had learned long ago that responding to backhanded compliments only invited more conflict. Her performance would have to speak for itself, and today it had spoken clearly. As the other participants took their turns, Sarah noticed that several of them were sneaking glances at her equipment and technique. A few even asked subtle questions about her scope settings and ammunition choice. The hostility was giving way to curiosity, though she could tell that full acceptance was still a long way off. Dale announced the preliminary scores at the end of the first session. Sarah's name was at the top of the list, several points ahead of Rick, who had held the range record for the past 3 years. The announcement was met with stunned silence. "There must be some mistake," Tony said, his voice lacking conviction. "Those scores can't be right." Dale double-checked his calculations and confirmed the results. Sarah had not only outshot every man on the range, she had done it by a significant margin. The implications of this were starting to sink in for everyone present. As the group broke for lunch, Sarah overheard fragments of conversations. Some of the men were questioning whether her equipment gave her an unfair advantage. Others were speculating about her background, wondering if she had military training that she hadn't mentioned. The idea that a civilian woman could simply be a better shooter than they were seemed impossible for them to accept. Sarah ate her lunch alone, watching the groups of men cluster together in animated discussion. She knew that her morning performance had only been the beginning. The real test would come in the afternoon sessions when the pressure increased and the targets became even more challenging. The afternoon session brought new challenges and renewed skepticism from the group. Dale had set up a complex course that would test rapid target acquisition, shooting from multiple positions, and accuracy under time pressure. This was where experience was supposed to matter most, where years of training would separate the serious shooters from the weekend hobbyists. Rick made a point of positioning himself near Sarah as they prepared for the next round. "Morning was just warm-up," he said, adjusting his tactical vest with practiced movements. "This is where we separate the real shooters from the lucky ones." Sarah continued her methodical preparation, checking her equipment and running through mental rehearsals of the course. She had trained for scenarios like this, though never in front of such a hostile audience. The pressure was different here, not just the challenge of the targets, but the weight of proving herself to people who seemed determined to see her fail. The course required shooters to engage targets from standing, kneeling, and prone positions while moving between stations. Each position offered different challenges, and the timer added an element of stress that could throw off even experienced marksmen. Sarah watched as the first few participants struggled with the transitions, their scores dropping significantly from the morning session. When Tony stepped up for his run, he made a show of his preparation, loudly discussing his strategy with the other men. His military background was evident in his smooth movements between positions, but the time pressure affected his accuracy. Several shots went wide, and his final score was respectable, but not exceptional. Rick's turn came next, and he approached the course with renewed determination. His performance was solid, showing the kind of consistency that comes from years of practice. He managed to complete the course within the time limit while maintaining decent accuracy, setting a benchmark that the remaining shooters would need to beat. "Let's see how the artist handles some real pressure," Rick called out as Sarah stepped up to the starting position. The timer started, and Sarah moved into action. Her transitions between positions were fluid and efficient, each movement economical and purposeful. She had practiced these sequences countless times in her mind and on smaller ranges, visualizing every step until it became second nature. At the standing position, she engaged the close targets with rapid precision. Her shots formed tight groups that would have been impressive even without time pressure. Moving to kneeling, she adjusted her technique seamlessly, her body finding the stable position that would allow for accurate long-range shots. The prone position offered the greatest stability, but required the most time to set up properly. Sarah dropped into position with practiced ease, her rifle settling into the familiar groove against her shoulder. The distant targets seemed to grow larger in her scope as she controlled her breathing and found her natural point of aim. Shot after shot found its mark with mechanical precision. The spectators had grown completely quiet, watching in disbelief as Sarah dismantled the course that had challenged every other participant. Her movements were smooth and confident, showing none of the hesitation or rushed uncertainty that had affected the others. When the timer buzzed to signal the end of her run, Sarah remained in position for a moment, ensuring that her final shot had been properly executed. Only then did she clear her rifle and stand, her expression calm and focused, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Dale called the targets back for scoring, and the silence stretched as he tallied the results. Sarah had not only beaten Rick's score, she had done it by a margin that left no room for doubt or explanation. Every shot had found the scoring rings, with most clustered in the highest value zones. "This is impossible," Tony muttered, shaking his head. "Nobody shoots that clean on a course like this." Several of the men crowded around Dale, demanding to see the targets for themselves. They examined each bullet hole, looking for any sign of scoring errors or equipment malfunctions that might explain Sarah's performance. Finding none, they turned their attention to her rifle and gear, searching for technological advantages that might account for her success. "What kind of scope are you running?" asked Jake, one of the younger participants who had been relatively quiet during the morning sessions. His question carried genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Sarah showed him her equipment, explaining her setup and modifications. Her rifle was high quality but not exotic. Her scope was expensive but within the reach of any serious competitor. There was nothing in her gear that the others couldn't afford or obtain for themselves. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Rick asked, his earlier bravado replaced by grudging interest. "Military? Police academy?" "YouTube and practice," Sarah replied simply. "Lots and lots of practice." The answer seemed to frustrate Rick more than if she had claimed some kind of formal training. The idea that someone could reach this level of skill through self-teaching and dedication challenged his assumptions about how expertise was acquired in the shooting sports. As the afternoon progressed through additional exercises, Sarah's performance remained consistently excellent. She adapted to each new challenge with ease, her scores placing her firmly at the top of the leaderboard. The other participants had stopped making jokes and were now watching her technique with the kind of attention usually reserved for studying competitors. During a break between exercises, Sarah overheard a heated discussion among several of the men. They were debating whether her performance was legitimate, with some suggesting that she must have had professional training that she wasn't admitting to. Others wondered if her equipment was somehow modified beyond regulation standards. "Maybe she's just naturally gifted," suggested Mike, an older participant who had been watching quietly. "Some people have the hand-eye coordination and mental focus for this sport." His comment was met with skeptical looks from the others. The idea that natural talent could overcome their years of experience was difficult for them to accept. Sarah knew that skepticism was natural when someone's performance exceeded expectations so dramatically. She had faced similar reactions before, though never from such a large and vocal group. The important thing was that her shooting spoke for itself, regardless of what explanations others might seek. The final exercise of the day was announced. A precision challenge at 600 yards with minimal time for sight adjustments. This was the kind of shot that separated skilled marksmen from casual shooters, requiring not just accuracy, but also the ability to read wind conditions and make precise calculations under pressure. As the participants prepared for this ultimate test, Sarah could feel the weight of their expectations. She had exceeded their initial dismissive predictions, but now they were watching for any sign that her performance had been based on luck rather than skill. The 600-yard precision challenge represented the pinnacle of the day's competition. At this distance, even the smallest variables could send a bullet inches off target. Wind speed, humidity, temperature, and even the shooter's heartbeat could affect the outcome. This was where champions were made and reputations were built. Dale explained the rules with extra emphasis on safety and precision. Each shooter would have 3 shots to establish their best group, with scoring based on consistency and proximity to the bullseye. The targets were barely visible to the naked eye, appearing as small white squares against the distant backstop. Rick stepped up first, determined to reassert his dominance on home territory. He spent several minutes studying wind flags and calculating atmospheric conditions, his experience evident in every movement. His shooting position was textbook perfect, developed through years of competition and training. His first shot struck the target ring, a solid hit that drew approving nods from the spectators. The second shot landed slightly left, affected by a subtle wind shift that had caught him between breaths. His third shot corrected for the wind but landed low, creating a respectable group that would have won most competitions. "Beat that," Rick said as he cleared his rifle, his confidence partially restored by his performance. Tony's turn produced similar results, his military training evident in his methodical approach. He took his time with each shot, building a group that spoke to years of disciplined practice. Several other participants followed, each producing scores that reflected their considerable skill level. As Sarah prepared for her turn, she could feel the collective attention of the group focused on her every movement. The morning and afternoon sessions had established her as a serious competitor, but this final challenge would determine whether her performance was sustainable under maximum pressure. She settled into her shooting position with the same calm deliberation she had shown all day. The distant target appeared in her scope, a small white square that demanded absolute precision. Sarah began her breathing routine, finding the rhythm that would steady her aim and calm her heart rate. The first shot felt perfect from the moment she pressed the trigger. The rifle recoiled smoothly against her shoulder, and she knew instinctively that the bullet was flying true. Through her scope, she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed, dead center in the bullseye. A murmur rippled through the watching group. Landing in the bullseye at 600 yards was difficult enough, but doing it on the first shot suggested either incredible luck or exceptional skill. The tension in the air was palpable as Sarah prepared for her second shot. She took her time, reading the wind flags and feeling for any atmospheric changes that might affect her bullet's flight. The second shot felt identical to the first, her technique replicated with mechanical precision. The bullet struck within inches of her first shot, creating the beginning of what promised to be an extraordinary group. "No way," someone whispered behind her. "This is impossible." Sarah remained focused on her task, blocking out the commentary and speculation from the gallery. The third shot was the most critical, as it would complete her group and establish her final score. Any deviation from her first two shots would expand her group size and potentially cost her the victory. She went through her entire routine again, checking and rechecking every variable that could affect her shot. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, familiar and comfortable after thousands of rounds of practice. When she was completely satisfied with her setup, she began her final trigger press. The shot broke cleanly, and Sarah knew immediately that it was good. Through her scope, she watched the bullet strike the target in almost exactly the same location as her first two shots. The three holes formed a group so tight that they nearly overlapped, a performance that would have been remarkable for an Olympic-level competitor. The silence that followed was complete and profound. Dale walked downrange to examine the target, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet facility. When he returned with the target, his expression was one of disbelief mixed with professional admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dale announced, "we have a new range record." The target showed 3 bullet holes clustered within a circle smaller than a quarter. At 600 yards, this represented shooting of such precision that it pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible with the equipment being used. Several of the spectators demanded to examine the target personally, unable to believe what they were seeing. Rick stared at the target for a long moment, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like this?" he asked, his voice carrying genuine bewilderment. "I told you," Sarah replied calmly. "Practice. Lots of practice." The explanation continued to frustrate the group, who seemed unable to accept that someone could achieve this level of performance without formal training or institutional support. They peppered Sarah with questions about her background, her training regimen, and her equipment specifications, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what they had witnessed. "You must have had military training," Tony insisted. "Nobody shoots like this without professional instruction." Sarah shook her head. "I've never been in the military. I learned everything from online resources and range time." The revelation that she was entirely self-taught seemed to deepen their confusion rather than resolve it. Several of the men exchanged glances, clearly struggling to reconcile their preconceptions about shooting sports with the evidence before their eyes. As word of Sarah's performance spread through the facility, other shooters and range staff began gathering to see the record-breaking target. The story was already taking on legendary proportions, with each retelling adding details about the impossible accuracy and the mysterious woman who had appeared from nowhere to dominate the competition. Dale made the official announcement of the day's winners. With Sarah's name at the top by a margin that made the competition seem almost unfair, her aggregate score across all exercises was not just the best of the day, but one of the highest in the range's history. "I don't understand how this is possible," Rick said, shaking his head as he packed his gear. "I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this." Sarah continued her methodical cleaning and packing routine, seemingly unaffected by the attention and speculation swirling around her. She had achieved what she came to do, proving that skill and dedication could overcome prejudice and skepticism. However, she sensed that her exceptional performance had raised more questions than it had answered. As the formal competition concluded, Sarah noticed that the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from the morning. The jokes and dismissive comments had been replaced by respectful curiosity and grudging admiration. Several participants approached her with genuine compliments and requests for training advice. Yet beneath the surface courtesy, Sarah could detect an undercurrent of frustration and confusion. Her presence and performance had challenged fundamental assumptions about their sport and their own abilities. The fact that she had accomplished this without any apparent institutional support or formal training only deepened the mystery. The celebration following Sarah's record-breaking performance was subdued, marked more by stunned respect than genuine congratulation. The other participants seemed unsure how to process what they had witnessed. Their earlier mockery had transformed into uncomfortable silence, broken only by whispered conversations about her extraordinary shooting. As the group gathered for the traditional post-competition discussion, Dale called for attention. "Before we wrap up today's session, I want to mention that we have a special visitor joining us next week. Commander James Mitchell from Naval Special Warfare will be conducting an advanced training seminar here at the range." The announcement immediately captured everyone's attention. Commander Mitchell was legendary in shooting circles, a former Navy SEAL sniper instructor whose reputation extended far beyond military circles. His civilian training seminars were rare and highly sought after, typically reserved for elite law enforcement and military personnel. The commander specifically requested to observe today's competition results, Dale continued. "He's always interested in identifying exceptional talent for potential inclusion in specialized training programs." Rick perked up at this news, his earlier disappointment forgotten. A SEAL commander? This could be huge for whoever catches his attention. He glanced around the group with renewed confidence. Finally, someone who can recognize real shooting ability. Several other participants nodded in agreement, their excitement palpable. The prospect of training with a Navy SEAL legend represented the pinnacle of achievement in their world. Each man began mentally rehearsing how he would present himself to Commander Mitchell, hoping to earn recognition and possibly advanced training opportunities. Sarah listened to the discussion with interest, but without the intense excitement displayed by the others. She had heard of Commander Mitchell's reputation and respected his achievements, but she wasn't seeking military training or validation from special operations personnel. Her goals in competitive shooting were personal rather than professional. "The commander will be reviewing today's scores and target results before next week's session," Dale explained. "He wants to understand the current skill level of our regular participants." This information sent a ripple of nervous energy through the group. Suddenly, the day's competition took on new significance beyond local bragging rights. Their performance would be evaluated by one of the most respected marksmen in the military community. Rick's demeanor shifted as he processed the implications. Despite his strong showing, Sarah's dominant performance meant that she would be the primary focus of Commander Mitchell's attention. The thought clearly troubled him, and he began voicing concerns about the evaluation process. "I hope the commander understands that today might not be representative of everyone's typical performance," Rick said carefully. "Sometimes shooters have unusually good days that don't reflect their real skill level." Tony nodded in agreement. "Consistency over time is what really matters in this sport. Anyone can get lucky for one session." Sarah continued packing her equipment, aware that the conversation was directed at her but choosing not to respond. She had faced this type of rationalization before, when her performance exceeded expectations. The suggestion that her success was based on luck rather than skill was a familiar attempt to preserve existing hierarchies. "The commander will want to see real military-style performance under pressure," Rick continued, his voice gaining confidence. That's completely different from target shooting in a controlled environment. Several other participants voiced agreement, creating a narrative that distinguished between civilian marksmanship and military application. They seemed to be preparing arguments for why Sarah's exceptional target scores might not translate to real-world scenarios that would interest a Navy SEAL commander. Dale listened to the discussion with growing annoyance. As a range instructor, he had seen this type of rationalization countless times when established shooters were outperformed by newcomers. "Gentlemen," he interrupted, "Commander Mitchell evaluates performance based on objective results, not subjective explanations." His comment effectively ended the speculation, but Sarah could see that the underlying tension remained. The prospect of evaluation by a military legend had raised the stakes considerably, transforming what should have been a celebration of achievement into a preview of future competition. As the group began to disperse, Sarah overheard fragments of conversations about preparation strategies for Commander Mitchell's visit. Several participants discussed special equipment they planned to bring and techniques they would demonstrate. The focus had clearly shifted from appreciating today's performance to positioning for next week's opportunity. Jake, the younger participant who had shown genuine interest in Sarah's equipment earlier, approached her as she finished packing. "That was incredible shooting today," he said sincerely. "I've never seen anything like those 600-yard groups." "Thank you," Sarah replied, appreciating the honest compliment. "You shot well today, too. Do you think you'll come back next week for the SEAL Commander's seminar?" Jake asked. Sarah considered the question. The training would undoubtedly be valuable, and she was curious about Commander Mitchell's methods. However, she was also aware that her presence might create tension in an environment where military credentials carried significant weight. "I'm planning to attend," she said finally. "It sounds like an excellent learning opportunity." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "It should be amazing. I've read about some of the techniques they use in special operations training. The precision requirements are supposed to be incredible." As Jake walked away, Sarah reflected on the day's events and their implications for the upcoming seminar. Her performance had clearly established her as a serious competitor, but it had also created expectations and skepticism in equal measure. Commander Mitchell's evaluation would likely determine how the shooting community viewed her going forward. Rick approached as she loaded her gear into her car, his expression serious. "Look, I want to be clear about something," he said. "What you did today was impressive, but next week will be different." "Military evaluation isn't just about target scores." Sarah looked at him calmly. "What exactly are you trying to tell me?" "I'm saying that Commander Mitchell will be looking for specific qualities that go beyond civilian marksmanship," Rick explained. "Mental toughness, tactical thinking, the ability to perform under combat stress. That's a completely different skill set." "I understand," Sarah replied evenly. "We'll see what happens next week." Rick seemed frustrated by her calm response, as if he had expected her to be intimidated by his warnings about military standards. "Just don't be disappointed if the commander's evaluation is different from today's scores," he said as he walked away. Sarah finished loading her equipment and drove home through the evening traffic, her mind processing the day's events. The shooting competition had gone better than she had hoped, but the social dynamics had been more complex than anticipated. Her success had clearly challenged existing assumptions about who belonged in elite shooting circles. The prospect of evaluation by Commander Mitchell added another layer of complexity to the situation. His military background and legendary reputation would likely influence how other participants viewed his assessment of her abilities. Sarah realized that next week's seminar would be about more than just shooting skills. It would be about proving that excellence could come from unexpected sources. As she arrived home, Sarah made a mental note to review her training routine and prepare for whatever challenges Commander Mitchell might present. She had proven herself once today, but she sensed that the real test was still to come. The week leading up to Commander Mitchell's visit buzzed with anticipation throughout the local shooting community. Word had spread about the legendary Navy SEAL instructor's upcoming seminar, and several additional participants had signed up. Hoping to learn from one of the military's most respected marksmen, Sarah spent the week maintaining her regular training routine, but she could sense the heightened expectations surrounding the upcoming session. Her record-breaking performance had made her the center of attention, and she knew that Commander Mitchell's evaluation would be scrutinized by everyone present. On the morning of the seminar, Sarah arrived at the range to find it more crowded than usual. The regular participants were there, along with several new faces that she recognized as serious competitive shooters from other facilities. The atmosphere was charged with nervous energy and anticipation. Rick had brought additional equipment and seemed unusually focused on his preparation routine. Tony was discussing military protocols with other veteran participants, clearly hoping to demonstrate his familiarity with special operations procedures. The competitive undercurrent was stronger than ever. Dale called for attention as a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. "Gentleman and lady," he added with a nod to Sarah, "Commander Mitchell has arrived." The man who stepped out of the vehicle immediately commanded respect through his presence alone. Commander James Mitchell was not particularly large or imposing physically, but his bearing and confidence marked him unmistakably as someone accustomed to high-pressure situations and life-or-death decisions. He was dressed in simple civilian clothes, but his movements were precise and economical, in a way that spoke to years of disciplined training. His eyes swept the assembled group with the kind of assessment that missed nothing and judged everything. "Good morning," Commander Mitchell said, his voice carrying easily across the range without seeming raised. "I'm here to observe your capabilities and potentially identify individuals for advanced training opportunities." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "I've reviewed the scores from last week's competition. Some of you demonstrated exceptional ability. Others showed room for improvement. Today we'll see who can perform under different conditions." The commander's gaze briefly met Sarah's, and she noticed something in his expression that she couldn't quite identify. It wasn't the skepticism she had grown accustomed to from other participants, but rather a look of serious evaluation, as if he were studying a puzzle he was trying to solve. "Today's exercises will test not just marksmanship, but decision-making under pressure, adaptability, and mental resilience," Commander Mitchell continued. "The scoring will be different from typical civilian competitions. I'm looking for specific qualities that translate to high-stress operational environments." Rick stepped forward slightly, clearly eager to make a strong impression. "Commander, we're honored to have you here. Most of us have military or law enforcement backgrounds and understand the kind of performance you're looking for." "Commander." Mitchell nodded acknowledgement but didn't respond directly to Rick's comment. Instead, he began setting up a series of exercises that were unlike anything the participants had encountered before. The first challenge involved shooting at multiple targets while receiving conflicting verbal instructions designed to test concentration under cognitive pressure. The second required rapid decision-making about which targets to engage based on changing tactical scenarios. Each exercise built upon the previous one, creating cumulative stress that revealed how shooters performed when their comfort zones were challenged. Sarah watched the first several participants struggle with the unfamiliar format. Even experienced shooters found their accuracy suffering when forced to process multiple streams of information while maintaining marksmanship precision. The exercises were revealing weaknesses that traditional target shooting never exposed. When Tony's turn came, his military background showed in his systematic approach to the challenges. He performed competently, though not exceptionally, and seemed satisfied with his demonstration of tactical thinking and disciplined execution. Rick's performance was more erratic. His shooting skills were solid, but the pressure of trying to impress Commander Mitchell seemed to affect his decision-making. He second-guessed himself on several scenarios and rushed shots that he would normally take more time to set up properly. As Sarah's turn approached, she could feel the familiar weight of expectation from the gathered spectators. Commander Mitchell positioned himself where he could observe her technique closely, his attention completely focused on her performance. The first exercise began, and Sarah immediately understood that this was unlike any shooting she had done before. The multiple targets and conflicting instructions created a cognitive load that demanded complete mental discipline. She blocked out everything except the essential information, filtering the noise to focus on what actually mattered for each shot. Her performance was smooth and efficient, her decision-making clear and decisive. She engaged targets in logical sequence, ignored irrelevant distractions, and maintained her shooting accuracy despite the artificial pressure. When the exercise concluded, she had achieved the highest score yet recorded. Commander Mitchell made notes on his clipboard, but showed no outward reaction to her performance. Interesting, was his only comment before calling for the next exercise. The subsequent challenges continued to reveal Sarah's exceptional abilities. Her mental focus remained unshakable, despite increasingly complex scenarios, and her shooting maintained the same precision that had broken range records the previous week. Most importantly, she demonstrated the kind of calm decision-making under pressure that Commander Mitchell was specifically evaluating. As the morning progressed, it became clear that Sarah was performing at a level that exceeded not just the other participants, but the expectations of the exercises themselves. Commander Mitchell began modifying the challenges in real time, adding complexity to test the limits of her capabilities. During a break between exercises, Commander Mitchell approached Sarah directly. "Ms. Martinez, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah followed him to a quiet area away from the other participants, curious about what had prompted the individual attention. The commander's expression was serious but not unfriendly. "I need to ask you about your background," he said directly. "Your performance today and last week suggests training and experience that goes well beyond civilian marksmanship courses." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I understand why you might think that, but I really am self-taught. Everything I know came from studying online resources and practicing." Commander Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "The level of performance you're demonstrating is extremely rare. It typically requires institutional training and extensive operational experience." "I can understand your skepticism," Sarah replied, "but I can assure you that I have no military or law enforcement background." The commander nodded slowly, though. His expression suggested he was still processing something about her that didn't quite fit his expectations. "Would you mind if I asked you to demonstrate something specific? I want to test a particular capability." Sarah agreed, and they returned to the main group. Commander Mitchell announced a final exercise that would test long-range precision under simulated combat stress. The target would be at maximum range, and the shooter would have to engage while receiving simulated radio chatter and time pressure. As Sarah prepared for this ultimate test, she noticed Commander Mitchell watching her with particular intensity. There was something in his examination that went beyond professional evaluation, as if he were looking for confirmation of a theory he was developing about her capabilities. The final exercise was set up at the maximum range the facility could accommodate, with targets placed at distances that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. Commander Mitchell had designed the scenario to simulate the kind of extreme pressure that special operations personnel might face in actual combat situations. Sarah took her position as simulated radio chatter, filled her earpiece, creating a constant stream of distracting information, mixed with occasional relevant commands. The psychological pressure was intense, designed to fragment concentration and test mental resilience under stress. As she settled into her shooting position, Sarah felt the familiar calm descend over her mind. The radio chatter became background noise, filtered out by the same mental discipline that had served her throughout the day. She focused on her breathing, her sight picture, and the fundamentals that had become second nature through countless hours of practice. The first shot rang out with perfect timing, striking the distant target with precision that drew murmurs of appreciation from the watching group. Sarah continued through the sequence, engaging multiple targets while processing the relevant information from the radio simulation and ignoring the deliberate distractions. Her performance was flawless, demonstrating not just marksmanship skills but the kind of mental toughness that Commander Mitchell had been specifically evaluating. When the exercise concluded, the silence that followed was profound and meaningful. Commander Mitchell studied the target results through his binoculars, his expression unreadable. When he lowered them, his gaze fell on Sarah with an intensity that made the other participants shift uncomfortably. "Outstanding," he said simply, but the word carried weight that resonated throughout the range. Rick stepped forward, unable to contain his frustration any longer. "Commander, I don't understand how someone with no formal training can outshoot people with years of military experience." Commander Mitchell turned to face Rick, his expression neutral but firm. "In my experience, exceptional performance can come from many different backgrounds. What matters is result, not resume. But surely military training provides advantages that civilian shooting can't match," Tony added, seeking support for his own confusion about Sarah's abilities. Military training provides structure and proven methods, Commander Mitchell replied, but it doesn't guarantee excellence. Some individuals possess natural capabilities that transcend formal instruction. The commander's words seemed to settle the debate, but Sarah could see that many of the participants remained unconvinced. Their worldview had been challenged by her performance, and Commander Mitchell's validation only added to their confusion. "Ms. Martinez," Commander Mitchell said, addressing Sarah directly, "could I speak with you again privately?" Sarah followed him away from the group, wondering what additional questions he might have. His evaluation had been thorough, and she thought she had demonstrated her capabilities clearly. When they reached a quiet area, Commander Mitchell's demeanor shifted slightly. "I need to ask you about something specific," he said. "During your shooting, I noticed something that caught my attention." Sarah waited for him to continue, unsure what aspect of her performance had prompted this additional scrutiny. "When you were setting up for that final long-range shot, you adjusted your position in a very specific way," Commander Mitchell explained. "It's a technique that's not widely known outside certain specialized units." Sarah felt a moment of confusion. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I just use whatever position feels most stable for the shot." Commander Mitchell studied her carefully. "The adjustment you made is something we teach in advanced sniper schools. It's designed to compensate for specific environmental factors at extreme range." "I probably picked it up from one of the online videos I studied," Sarah said. "I've watched hundreds of hours of instruction from various sources." The commander nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he was still processing something. "Would you mind if I asked you to roll up your sleeves?" The request seemed odd, but Sarah complied, pushing up the sleeves of her shooting jacket. Commander Mitchell's attention focused immediately on her left forearm, where a small tattoo was visible just below her elbow. His expression changed dramatically when he saw the tattoo. It was a simple design, barely 2 inches across, but Commander Mitchell's reaction suggested it held significant meaning. "Where did you get that tattoo?" he asked, his voice taking on a different quality. Sarah looked down at the small symbol on her arm. "I got it a few years ago. It's just a design I liked." Commander Mitchell stared at the tattoo for a long moment, his mind clearly working through implications that Sarah didn't understand. "Do you know what that symbol represents?" "Not really," Sarah admitted. "I just thought it looked interesting." The commander was quiet for several minutes, studying both the tattoo and Sarah's face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "That's the unofficial symbol of a very specific military unit," he said slowly. "It's not something that civilians would typically encounter or choose randomly." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "I don't understand." "I've never been in the military." Commander Mitchell continued to study her, his expression a mixture of confusion and recognition. "The unit that uses this symbol is highly classified. Very few people outside the organization would even know it exists." "There must be some mistake," Sarah said, her voice carrying genuine bewilderment. "I got this tattoo from a shop in the city. The artist had a book of designs, and I just picked one that appealed to me." The commander was quiet again, clearly wrestling with information that didn't fit together logically. "Ms. Martinez, I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever heard the name Operation Nightingale?" Sarah shook her head. "No, I've never heard of it." Commander Mitchell's expression grew even more serious. Operation Nightingale was a highly classified program that ended several years ago. It involved training civilian assets for specific types of missions. The implications of his words were starting to penetrate Sarah's consciousness, though she still didn't understand how they could relate to her. "I don't know anything about any operation like that. The symbol on your arm was used exclusively by participants in that program," Commander Mitchell explained. "It was a way for operatives to identify each other without compromising security." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing to process this information. "That's impossible. I would remember being involved in something like that." Commander Mitchell studied her for a long moment, his expression troubled. Memory modification was sometimes used in the program for security purposes. Participants might not retain conscious awareness of their involvement. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The possibility that she might have a hidden past, training she couldn't remember, seemed impossible, yet somehow explained the questions that had always surrounded her exceptional abilities. "I need to make some phone calls," Commander Mitchell said finally. "Would you be willing to meet with me again in a few days?" There are people who might be able to provide answers about your background. Sarah nodded numbly, still trying to process the implications of what she had learned. As they walked back toward the main group, she felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted fundamentally. The other participants were discussing the day's exercises when they returned, but the conversation stopped when they saw Commander Mitchell's serious expression. He announced that the seminar was concluded and thanked everyone for their participation. As the group began to disperse, Rick approached Sarah one final time. "I guess I owe you an apology," he said, his earlier hostility replaced by grudging respect. "Whatever your background, you've earned the right to be here." Sarah accepted his words with a nod, but her mind was elsewhere, grappling with questions about her own identity that she had never thought to ask. The shooting competition that had started as a simple test of marksmanship had revealed mysteries about herself that would change everything she thought she knew about her own past.